Welcome, everybody. My name is Susan Barber, and I'm the Community Education Manager at Mission Hospice and Home Care. And Mission Hospice and Home Care is a small, not for profit, and non affiliated, which means that we're not part of any large healthcare system. We're not part of a hospital system. We're a small hospice program that resides in San Mateo, which is in the county just below San Francisco. And we serve people in our community of San Mateo County and in northern Santa Clara County, which is the county just south where San Jose is. And so we serve a wide range of people, ranging from migrant farm workers out on the coast that supply a lot of our food to Silicon Valley and all of the craziness that goes on there. So we welcome all of you. I particularly am grateful today to see that we had people coming in from all over the world. And I just so appreciate that for our little hospice program here in San Mateo County. I'm so very happy to have Wilka Roig with us today, who I first encountered at the Elisabeth Kubler Ross training that went on for the better part of the end of last year. It was an 11-week training. And her talk, which is the same talk she's doing today on symbolic language at end of life care, at the end of hearing that talk, I was just so thrilled because this is an experience that I've had on more than one occasion with loved ones who were dying. And it's so wonderful to hear this spoken about because I've heard other people who have had a similar experience say, and I thought I was losing my mind, or my mother, she must have been losing her mind. She started talking about people that had been dead for years, or that she was going to the train and my mother hated to travel. So Wilka will cover a lot of information today. There will be time for Q&A. And as much as possible, we'd like to do that live with people actually asking Wilka questions. You're welcome to post any questions you have up in the chat. And for those of you that are new for Zoom, you can move your cursor to the bottom or top of your screen and see a set of icons. And if you want to turn off your screen, hit the little camera. You're all muted now and will remain muted until the Q&A portion of the program. And for chat, you can move the cursor over to those three little buttons, or if you have a chat feature. And if you send it out to everybody, if you want to send a private message, if you're asking a question that you feel you don't want out in the public, you're welcome to send it to me, to Susan Barber. And thank you so very much. I want to just say a couple of this. There's not CEUs for today's training. And what I'm going to do right now is spotlight Wilka, and I am going to introduce her. Wilka is a wonderful practitioner. She is the president of the Elisabeth Kubler Ross Foundation of Mexico. And I'm also on the advisory board for the Elisabeth Kubler Ross Foundation, so our paths cross from time to time. Wilka has a private practice as a therapist, as a counselor. She has a lot of, does some really deep work with people interested in dream work. She has an art component to her practice. And I would say that more than anybody I've met in the last year or so, Wilka is a real Renaissance woman, and I would like to turn this over to Wilka so that she's able to introduce herself. And thank you so much for joining us today, Wilka. I'm going to mute my.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's an honor to be with you and your community and everyone else who has joined us from around the world. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm really excited to have this opportunity to share what is a constantly evolving work. So it's not exactly the same presentation that I shared for the Essence of Caring for the EKR Foundation Global. But what continues to evolve in this process, because as we are present with loss, grief, death, dying, and all of these transitions in life, we can only learn more. And we learn more from our experiences with human to human than we ever could from any teaching or any reading, even though I love reading and learning. So we continue to evolve with our experiences, and I invite you today to take this opportunity also to open up, to expand your experiences and to expand your perception of what is possible. I think I'll just get started, and I'll tell you that, I use PowerPoints just as a sort of guide, more or less, but I may veer in different directions, and I may, disagree with myself, and, we'll just kind of navigate this together. And I invite you to share your questions in the chat box, and if you preface your question with the word question. It'll be easier for us to find them later in the chat. And hopefully we'll have time for questions. So that's the other thing. I might decide that we'll end the slideshow part of it earlier if people want to have a dialogue, because we all learn more, including me, from your questions. So, and I like to also address who's in the room and what is coming up for you, rather than just me assuming that I just have something to say to you that's pre-described. And I will offer the disclaimer that English is my second language, although I grew up mostly bilingual. And so sometimes my language flows very nicely and sometimes I get really stumped. So bear with me with the language barrier when it comes, if it comes. But the nice thing is that if we're in between languages, we're also sort of between worlds, and then magic happens. So I'm going to share my screen. And in the meantime, I want to say I see some familiar names and faces, and thank you for joining us. Okay, so here's my, let me move this up here. I don't know if you'll be able to see me there, but all right. So my passion and my focus with any work is with symbolic language and that which is unseen, intangible, and unexplainable. And it is my mission to create spaces for us to be able to share that aspect of our human experience, which is mostly put aside, negated, or considered, as Barbara said, it must be crazy or something's wrong when we are having these experiences that nobody else seems to be talking about. So I like to create those spaces and invite all of us to share about those things, which are very common, in fact. And so let's see. So I will be speaking to you from my experience and observation. While I have some experience and I have been trained and have degrees and certifications and all that stuff, really, all I can speak is about what I know to be true based on experience. And one of the things I always say is that early on in my life trajectory, I realized that it's best to not believe anything, because when we don't believe anything, anything is possible. And so I try to not hold on to abstract beliefs, but rather allow myself to have experiences and base my position on them. And that always evolves. So even my experience and observation takes me, as I said, to negate what at one point I thought was true. So I will be talking to us from my experience as a transpersonal psychologist, a dream worker, grief counselor, death doula, and as a human being, a person who has survived losses, who goes through grief processes often, and a human who is going to die. So I want to start today with our friend here, Miklam Papalotl. She is the black butterfly, although she sometimes is kind of brown. And this is a Mexican moth, actually. And for centuries, she has been considered the cursed butterfly because she is meant to be the messenger from the underworld, from the Mictlan, which is the land of the dead. And so as a collective in Mesoamerica, before, in pre-Columbian times even, she was a symbol and representation of everything that is beyond life. And she came as a messenger and also as a warning, perhaps, that death is near. And I'm only sharing this with you because each of us has our own personal symbology that we may or may not be aware of. And our subcultures, our families, our communities, and then the larger cultures that we are a part of also have their own symbology and their own symbolic language about a variety of things. As human beings, we tend to classify and generate archetypes and symbolic representations of ideas and of experiences, energies, and so on. And so part of my invitation to you is to become more receptive to those in yourself and your loved ones. And if you're, working with grief, loss, or end of life, with those that you are working with, because a lot goes on beyond what is tangible and what is said and what is, conceptually known. And that is part of what this talk is about. So I'm sure that if you have worked with a grieving person, or if you have gone through your own process of loss and grief, if you have been accompanying a dying person, or or have faced a terminal illness or a life threat, you may have, or most likely have, witnessed or experienced yourself something that represents something for you, that it's outside of what we are told that we will be experiencing. And it is, we can talk about more simply something like, butterflies in general seem to have a symbology of transformation, but also when somebody is dying or has died, often those who stay behind have experiences with butterflies or birds or feathers or stones or flowers. It really depends on the person, but you may have heard that there's been a reference made that something that showed up suddenly became meaningful after or during the process of loss, grief, or dying. And then, of course, if you have been with a dying person, you may have witnessed and experienced stuff that is way more monumental than a butterfly or a hummingbird, for example. You may have witnessed parent telepathies and capacities to know information without it being uttered or even declared. So there's a whole range of possibilities in this in between life and death, in between the life that we knew and the life that awaits us. And so that's where the symbolic and the imaginal are. And that is the space and place that I prefer to abide in and invite you all to consider opening up to. So we are meaning-making beings. So either in the present or as we look back on experiences that we have lived, we tend to try to figure out what it means or why it happened. And so it is in our nature to make sense of things. We can look at this as wishful thinking. We can look at it as some form of justification of what it was or what wasn't. Or we can look at it as a way in which we make our experience more meaningful and more beautiful, with the whole spectrum of experience, from the most tragic experience to the most joyful. And so I like to choose to make my life meaningful and beautiful by looking into the possible meanings of things. And what I also find is that as we're in this process of meaning making, which confronts us when we are confronting loss and when we're confronting dying and death, where we look back to make sense of what happened, we are also enriching our experience and allowing ourselves to come into acceptance of what has been, so that we can move forward, whether it is with the process of dying or the process of transforming through grief. So in my view, based on my own experience and observation, the purpose of change, loss, and transition could be contained within these things that I have come to outline here for now, for today. So to me, life is made up of surviving losses. We either survive these changes or we don't. And if we do, that's life, right? And so I see loss, big transition, facing death, losing someone, going through grief, as invitations and as initiation, and that this is part of our growth and evolution individually and collectively. So to me, change, loss, and transition are an integral part of our experience, not something to be avoided or denied, and something that invites us to transcend who we were until that moment in life. And as we are able to transcend that and we grow and evolve, then we also bring those around us with us, and we all grow and evolve. And this is part, to me, of human evolution. I'm no scientist, so don't take my word for any of that or assume that that I think that I'm right. This is just my view. And new possibilities can only be found in the unknown, in the unfamiliar. And so life is made up of all of these cycles of birth, death, and rebirth, life, death, life. And we have to not know in order to discover something completely new, because otherwise we would already know it. The other thing is that if we think about it, change implies that things cannot remain the same, right? So there's an intention here of having to change. And if we take it upon ourselves to accept the invitation, then we can not stay the same by growing and transforming and transcending. Okay, so with each loss, any kind of loss, from losing our cell phone to losing a loved one, and I don't mean to minimize one or aggrandize the other, we're forced to change how we behave, how we react and relate to ourselves and our surroundings changes. Something dies and we have to adapt. And with each loss, we face the opportunity for a rebirth in the form of transforming our perspective, our attitude, our approach, or, in bigger losses, a lot more. So every confrontation with loss, big or small, is an invitation to. And this is something that you may have observed. Working with end of life and working with families with terminal patients, I notice how it's not just the dying patient that goes into this space of life review, of considering priorities, of letting go, allowing change, making new choices, redefining who the person is. This invitation comes to everyone who is involved in the facing of this loss. So it's not just the dying patient, it's all of the family members, all of the close friends, anyone who is in that environment with the dying person, who is in some way touched by the possibility of the death of this person. Everybody goes into this process of life review, of reconsidering priorities, of thinking about regrets and guilts and shames, of wanting to resolve the unresolved, give closure to things so that everybody can be at peace, and then allow for the letting go that is required, for the detachment that is required for any transition, especially when we're talking about the death of a loved one. And every confrontation with loss invites us to this initiation that prepares us to be, who we are becoming, right? So if we think about our lives and we think about the trajectory of our lives, all of the crisis, and all of the challenges that we have survived, each one of those has been an initiation that has given us the impetus or the momentum to become the person who we are today. And I invite you to look at your life from that lens and to see how every invitation you've accepted and every initiation that any loss in your life has given you has contributed to what is meaningful to you today, what your priorities are today, and your perspective about life and yourself today. So the transpersonal spectrum, which transpersonal is beyond the personal, but it also speaks about all of these unexplainable experiences that we'll go into a little bit more in this presentation. That spectrum of experience that we cannot so much explain, or that I'm just not going to, invest my time in trying to find explanations to, is an integral part of our human experience as we face loss and death, as we survive loss. So what I mean by this is that as things are in general, not specifically, because of course there's always nuance in everybody's experience, but in general, we associate loss and death and grief as undesirable, as um, inconvenient, as unpleasant. And we want to avoid all of that at all costs. But what we are not being told ever is that there's a whole component to this that opens up incredible possibilities for us as humans, especially in our feeling of connection and being one with and being connected with love, especially. And so our cultures in the recent century have been focused on the suffering, the pain, the anguish, and everything as bad and negative, and as let's not even admit it and let's avoid it. And then let's pretend that if we don't talk about it, it won't happen to us. But with putting that aside, we're also not allowing ourselves to have this other part. And I think about, you may have your own experiences that come up for you right now. I'm thinking about when my grandmother was killed in an accident where she was run over by a trailer truck on the day that my grandmother and I were reuniting after 20 years for Christmas. It was definitely a very traumatic and shock, and it was devastating. And at the same time, it was about the most magical time in my life. Nobody wants to talk about that, right? It sounds like that's not right. How can you talk about one of the biggest tragedies of your life and also talk about it being the most magical? But the thing is that in my experience, this is true. Those two come together. And there's a function for this, the magic, that goes along with this tragedy. When we just have this, we just have that tragedy, which is really heavy. When we have this, it lifts us enough so that we find a balance. And in my experience, find that being open to both is what allows us to accept the invitation, go through the initiation, and transcend into, our highest potential at that moment, and whatever that experience has brought to contribute to that. And so, yes, so included in this spectrum are dreams, visions, extrasensory perceptions, synchronicities, symbolic occurrences, and more. When this experience happened with my grandmother, I really felt like I was in an altered state of consciousness the whole time. And maybe this has happened to you. Everything just felt, it was like a lucid dream. Everything felt extra vivid and extra tangible, and it was almost as if I could see unseen connections and unseen energies. I don't even know how to explain it. But this is why it's so important to me to create these spaces so that we can share these experiences, because the moment we start to share them, we start to invite others to also share them, and then we realize that we are not as crazy as we sound. As I am sharing this with you right now, I always still get that tinge of, you're going to think I'm crazy. But it was my experience, and amazing things happened. Miracles happened in that time. And so, even when there's that huge devastation, there's this beauty and lightness that, as I said, just kind of helps that balance. That right now, I think we have been so denied it. That's not the right word, but I can't remember the right word. That we're just with the heaviness. And so we suffer more, and we are in more distress, and we are more lost. One of the things that this magical aspect of loss does is that it helps to guide us too, so we don't feel so lost. So let's keep going. Yes, so this is what I was saying. So these inexplicable and supernatural, for lack of a better term, occurrences complement the challenging aspects, and then allow this balance and allow us to be able to see the blessings and the gifts and the lightness and the insight and that deep sense of connection. One of the things that makes us suffer so much when we are facing loss and when somebody is dying is that we are afraid of the loss of the connection, the loss of the love, the loss of the presence. When we have this, we realize that we don't lose any of that. It all happens over here. And I can say this to you with all of this confidence because of my own experience, but of course, because of the experience of accompanying the dying and the grieving. And as I said, when we allow ourselves that permission, when we express that permission to others, it makes a huge difference. Yeah, this is redundant. And Elisabeth Kubler Ross says that this symbolic language is the universal language that people all over the world use when they're in crisis. And so she knew it. Many others have known it, that this is something that is common to all of us. Of course, culture, country, language will give different nuance to every person, or every person from one particular country or who speaks a particular language. But there's a way in which the human has this tendency. And the reason why I brought the cursed butterfly as an opening for our session today is that, the symbol of that is pre-Columbian. So even back then, of course, and perhaps back then more than now, for sure, we lived more symbolically. And I think it's time to go back to that and to take whatever we have advanced with our technology and our capacity today with all of the wisdom of our ancestors that had us much more connected to nature and to each other and to our own human nature and capacity for compassion and connection. So what do I mean by symbolic language? All of these lists that I'm going to show you here are only a small sample of possibility, and all, of course, through the lens of my experience and observation and of my brain and my, just human limitation in general. So I'm sure that none of these lists are complete, but this is just to give you a sense. And so symbolic language can show up verbally, non-verbally, with imaginal, in the imagination, metaphorically, somatically, in the body, in the environment around us, in the circumstances that we're in metaphysical form, or in these unexplainable and supernatural ways. And it's interesting to notice, if you are someone who accompanies the grieving or the dying, or in your relationships, really, I mean, this is applicable in the most personal and in the most professional ways or contexts. Notice what words people use to express their experience. The words themselves have a symbolic meaning to them beyond the words that are being said. I was working with a woman whose husband has received a terminal diagnosis, and so we started the work of accompaniment with the family. And she kept saying, I'm not going to let myself, in Spanish, the word is different. Let me see if I can think of the translation, but literally she was saying, I'm not going to let myself fall. So the word that she was using really means like fall apart or let herself have her mood go down. This is what the sort of colloquial meaning is. But she kept saying the same word. And then later, we were talking about her life history and other crises in her lives, other losses. And there's a moment in each of the stories of her losses where she actually literally fell and broke something and then had to go into surgery. And she was telling me her whole life story of loss through all of the pieces of her body that had been replaced or worked on over the course of her, I don't know how many, she must be in her early 70s. So it was very interesting, and this is what I'm talking about. There's a way in which our language also speaks to the ways in which we cope, the ways in which we cope speak to how we feel in symbolic ways. So it's a very fascinating way to look at our human experience and what we share with others, looking at what else is there. Okay. So we can experience expressions of the symbolic through dreams, which has been one of my specializations for a really long time. But also we experience waking dreams, which are these moments, like I was explaining earlier or telling you earlier, that feel like lucid dreams where we're awake, but it doesn't feel like real life, you know? So there are those kinds of dreams. There are imaginal journeys, chance encounters, coincidences, synchronicities, songs, number patterns, recurring symbols, animals, insects, visitations, messages in nature, paranormal experiences. And as I said, these are probably not complete lists. So something that was very interesting to me was, as I noticed, the grieving body, the dying body, and the body in transition or facing loss enters into an altered state of consciousness. I think, is everything okay? All right. You can still see me and hear me, yes? Okay. Something changed in my screen. Everything good? Okay. So, right. I'm just gonna put this away. Okay. So I've observed this, and the level of altered state is relative. And again, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not pretending to prove anything or explain anything. I am only sharing with you my observations and my experience. And this being in an altered state, this being in the in-between, sleep and awake, in the who I was and who I'm becoming, this in-between place, allows a greater capacity and sensitivity to perceive what is happening in the present. There's a way in which this, you know, these moments, these initiations in life place us in the present. We're less, you know, in the everyday preoccupations and distractions. And we're not used to being in the present in this way. And perhaps that's all that is. But regardless, it seems altered in the sense that it's not our everyday functional mindset. And then in this state, we can tap into our intuition and our capacity for connection beyond the physical and beyond words. And this is why, to me, this is so important and essential, because a big component of our suffering through loss and facing death is our possible belief or our fear that there is no connection that sustains beyond the change, beyond the transition, beyond the death. But many people will tell you differently when you let them tell you about these experiences that are, you know, in the symbolic realm. So the in-between, this is the space that I like to be in, and this is the space that I invite you all to consider being in, and maybe you already are used to being in it. I find that those of us who work in end of life and grief and loss inevitably are familiar with this to one degree or another. And so the in-between to me is that space between asleep and awake, between birth and death, life, between light and darkness, spirit and matter, grief and relief, pain and pleasure, comfort and discomfort, incarnate and discarnate. Or I don't know how you say that actually in English. So, and I don't know if you've been with the dying and have had the experience of observing the dying person as they go in and out, as they seem to be right outside their body and back in, as their consciousness shifts to some other place where they see others and speak to others and get directions and instructions, and then they come back and suddenly are really uncomfortable to realize that they're back in their bodies. I don't know if that's been something you've experienced, but I've experienced it enough that in my experience, it's true and it happens. And therefore there's that in between. Okay. And so this is really meant as an illustration on some observations that I've had, that I have seen with my clients and my patients, in myself, that also speaks to me about this in-between place. So this is just, again, as an example, it's not all the symptoms, it's not meant to be a dissertation, it's just my observations. So mothers will know that after giving birth, you may have this kind of experience that changes your sleeping patterns, your eating patterns, your emotional states, your mental states, your capacities with your body, and puts you in that altered state of connecting with the newborn. It's maybe not everyone's experience, but it's a general experience. So somebody who is going through stress due to a life transition has changes in sleeping patterns, eating patterns, emotional patterns, mental states, physical capacity, and also enters into this altered state. Symptoms of grief: change in sleeping patterns, eating patterns, emotional states, mental states, physical capacity, and whatever else. And symptoms of near death, perhaps a little bit different, but change in sleeping patterns, eating patterns, emotional states, mental states, relation with the surroundings, capacity, physical capacity. So I like to use this as an argument that through loss and transition, whatever form it takes, we are in that in-between space where suddenly our capacities are different. It is not our usual way of going about things. And generally, those kinds of states and patterns take us inward, disconnect us from, the usual things, maybe lower our interest in what we're usually interested in engaging with, so that something else can take place. And often in any one of these, there's a complete revision of life, of who we have been, of what our priorities are, of what our choices are going to be, and a re-identification or a revision of who we have been, who we think we are, who we want to be, who are becoming. So there's also an identity question there. There's a detachment from something or someone or roles, and then there's an easing into something new, something different. Right, so this is my experience and observation, that these experiences all happen in that in-between, and that in that in-between, we have more access to all of this unseen, intangible, symbolic. And so our work also happens in that in-between. We go to where they are, and then from there, we let them guide us in order for us to accompany them and guide them in their own process. So, okay, so because I've worked with dreams for a long time, and I started working with dreams professionally as a psychologist, but then I started to realize how, dream work is relevant in especially in transitions, but always, especially, and also in end of life. There are certain things that I've come to understand about the function of dreams in this context. Of course, there's many theories and hypotheses about the reasons for dreams and the function of dreams, and what they do and what they're saying. But from my perspective, guiding people through transition, there is something very essential that we can learn from and be guided by with our dreams. And Elisabeth actually had several interesting things to say about dreams that, you know, have fallen out of the focus that we have on her work. And I'll just make a brief mention that the work of Elisabeth Kubler Ross is incredible, and there is so much to it. It is so vast, and there's so much there that I invite you to definitely look beyond the 5 stages, which were not really meant to be just 5 stages. And it's really not the only contribution of her work. There's over 23 book titles that you can look at and learn from. And anyway, she was really ahead of her time. So yes, so she talks about the dream language as the language of the unconscious that speaks when the conscious voice fails. And my teacher, Jeremy Taylor, used to say that everything that comes from and through our dreams is everything that was not yet speech ripe, right? Something that we still could not articulate it, but that in the unconscious, it was already, it had already happened. It just wasn't ready to come to consciousness because we could not articulate it. And so I find there's an overlap there. Okay, so I'll preface this with, if you want to work with dreams and you haven't, all you need to do is pay attention to them, write them down, and spend some time revisiting the events of your dreams in your mind. You can share them with others, but one way to get to know your own dreaming and to get to be in touch with your own symbolic language is by paying attention to them, writing them down, and that in itself will be will open up a lot for you. The moment that if you think you don't remember your dreams, or you don't remember them, but you think you don't dream, as you start to engage with them and express an interest, they will respond. And so sometimes maybe you won't remember your dreams, but your client does, or your patient does, or your loved one does. And then you can talk about their dreams and somehow through that, learn about what is coming up. So yeah, so dream work can be very simple and then it can go very deep. So, and the depth of it comes with our own engagement with it. It's kind of like a courtship, and then it becomes a committed relationship. And then it can become a relationship of an evolutionary relationship of a lifetime. So dreams help direct the practice of life review, addressing unfinished business, unattended grief, losses, unresolved guilt and shame. They point to the areas that need to be addressed to find healing and resolution before death or at any moment in our lives. And they offer daily reports of how this process is going in all aspects of our being. And this is something that with time and dedication, you might get more clear on how this might apply to you. But even if you have no experience with dreaming, and you're working with someone or accompanying someone who has dreams and wants to share them, just listen. Because ultimately, dreams is just one of the ways in which symbolic language shows up. So you don't need to be a dream worker to appreciate the symbolic meaning of what is being shared. And when you are working with a grieving person or accompanying someone who's dying or grieving, or in your own case too, you know, they may want to tell you a story about their life, or they may want to tell you a dream, and all of it is just as relevant and just as significant. And so, so there's no requirement to be a dream expert in order to appreciate this. But what I started to observe is that the same things that keep us awake at night, the worries, concerns, are exactly the same things that keep us from having a good and smooth transition into our death. Or the things that get in the way of us being able to move through our grief more smoothly. I'm not saying any of these processes are necessarily easy, but there are certain things that we probably might know already or be familiar with that, you know, unfinished business, unattended losses, unresolved guilt and shame are the kinds of things that get in the way. And they're also the kinds of things that come up when we are facing loss and dying and death. Dreams point to those things on any given day. So our dreams are showing up and telling us, hey, how about we work on this today? We can work on this and come to acceptance with this or resolution with this, and that way we can sleep better tonight. And in a way, dreams are guiding the work of end of life in life. And so one of the things I like to say is that the work of life and end of life is the same. And if we don't do it during our life, we will be doing it when we are facing our death. And we do it consciously and we do it unconsciously. And this is another thing that I learned working with patients and dreams, is that the dreams are working all of this out unconsciously. And if we pay attention to it, then we can engage it in a conscious way, in an intentional way, and clear it out more, with more time rather than at the very end. And I love this quote: once you see what the heart really needs, it doesn't matter if you're going to live or die, the work is always the same. And so we can do the work today, or it'll catch up with us before we end our experience alive. And I love this quote too, is that the thing that we come here to do is to learn unconditional love, and dreams support that process of developing unconditional love, first and foremost with ourselves and with our lives and with what we have considered our mistakes and our failures and our regrets. And that not only are the people in the face of death the ones that have to come to learn unconditional love, but those around them. And that when the whole family, the loved ones who are around are doing the work with the dying person, it also smooths the transition for everyone. And I've seen this over and over again. I have had the great privilege and honor of working with dying patients at home. And the environment is one in which we can engage the family members and loved ones in this process, and to have everyone doing it together and intentionally, it's amazing what happens. And and I'm saying I'm very naive and very, because, of course my experience is still very limited. But all of my experiences have been relatively smooth in accompanying the dying, and the transitions of my dying patients have all been pretty, I would say, on the smoother side of things. And so I don't know whether it's just been a coincidence in my life, or if this work, in fact, I'd like to believe this, that it's because we do this work together that we are supporting the environment and the process for everyone. So yes, the work of life and end of life includes, and again, these lists are not complete, making meaning, repairing relationships, forgiving self and others, healing shame, resolving guilt, addressing regrets, exploring unfinished business, accepting and valuing life exactly as it has been lived, and making peace and being at peace. And so this is the work we could do at any time. And we could do it through our dream work. We could do it through other symbolic transpersonal practices. And we can also begin to observe it in the processes as we are accompanying others or going through it ourselves. So, okay. So I like to make parallels between, experiencing loss and experiencing, nearing death. Because in a way, our life is made up of gradual, smaller deaths that are our losses. And all of them prepare us for that final moment, which is the grand finale, which is the most important moment of our lives, is coming into near death. So this is just a little quote that I like as well, that our job as companions is to be sitting and listening and learning from those who are in that process. So you may have heard of something like this. Different people call it different things, but there's an awareness of being near death. And this awareness could be conscious or unconscious. And this is what I have observed, because as a psychologist working with clients, I have actually guided people through their through their end of life, or through their life or end of life work, because of the dreams that they brought to our therapeutic process. And then it happened enough times for me to believe this to be true, that there's an unconscious part of us that is preparing us for death, even if we're not consciously aware that death is near. Because several of my clients over the course of my private practice, we have done this amazing work with our dreams, felt like we have really resolved all these things that were unfinished, and we've come to a place of healing and lightness, and we've decided to terminate our professional relationship, and then they die within 5 days. This has happened to me enough times. It's not too many, but it's enough that it calls my attention that these people who didn't have any obvious or detected cause of death, which, by the way, we all die because we are alive. That's the only cause of death. But nobody had any terminal illnesses or anything that they could think that they could be dead in 5 days. But we finished an amazing work of life review and all of this end of life work, not because we were preparing for death, but just because we were doing therapeutic work. And once they felt complete, they were ready to die. And, they didn't know it, but something in them knew it. And so near-death awareness is something that we could be conscious of or unconscious of, and therefore near-loss awareness is possibly the same. So when we observe our dreams and tap into the ways in which, the unseen and the intangible communicate to us, we may be able to have more awareness of this invitation to prepare and this invitation to go into an initiation or a transition. And so what is this awareness? It's the broad range of physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual experiences that a person expresses when coming nearer to the time of death or the time of transition. In a conscious process is we see it in people who are dying slowly, and the whole experience is a gradual experience, whereas people who are not aware that death is near are going through this process more unconsciously. But, my hypothesis is that it's happening all the time, and that in a way we are constantly preparing for that, grand finale. And then here's another quote from Elisabeth, that no one who is dying, regardless of their age, doesn't know that they are dying. So she's always inviting us to invite them to speak and for us to listen, because we have a lot to learn from those who are on that threshold, whichever threshold, whether it's the threshold of loss, surviving loss, facing death. So when someone is near death awareness, in the awareness of near death, we find that there are messages that we can observe through dreams, visions, synchronicities, imaginings, stories, even artworks. Oh yeah, I have it there. Different impulses, sudden needs and requests, all of these things are telling us important information. So sometimes there's the use of symbolic language, objects, drawings, stories, to begin the conversations that need to be had. A dying person, if you give them the chance, especially when they're at home. This is why I think it's such, it's such a beautiful opportunity to be able to die at home. There will be ways in which the dying person, or in the case of a grieving person, will find prompts for the conversations they need to have, even if they're not conscious of it. Something will call their attention and they'll follow that impulse and begin to speak about it or address it. And that will open up the possibility for what could maybe have been considered a difficult conversation. And usually the grieving or dying person is the person who guides the process. So we're just there paying attention and then letting ourselves be led. Yeah, so that's good. So recognizing messages. So when you're with it's the same with grieving or dying person. I mean, maybe not exactly the same, but these things can be applied in any of these contexts. Like I said, everything that is said and every action that is taken can mean something. So we're receptive to that. And we notice a different shift in the way that they are behaving. And there's all of these different things that you can notice in a person. I mean, of course, like I said, these lists are not complete. So you may, if you've been with a dying person, you could notice or remember these different kinds of attitudes and behaviors that are present or that could be present. And so how do we respond to those messages? So when we notice anything, and this is the work of accompaniment, is, again, I can't say this enough. We're not there because we know anything, even if we do. We are there because we are creating the space that is safe and comfortable for the person to have their own process. And that's our real job there, whether the person is a loved one or whether it's a professional relationship. And so all we are there to do is to open it up more and to invite more of whatever is coming up. So you can ask for more information, ask open-ended questions. Well, what did that feel like to you? And what do you think that meant? Rather than answering questions ourselves or telling other people what we think or believe. And then, encourage that attempt for communication and, maybe express how nice it is that you have the opportunity for them to share all of that with you, things like that. Yes, so a big part of our job is to meet them where they are. So here are some signs that you may have observed. And I have to say that sometimes when somebody is in grief, they may say these things and go through these things, and it doesn't mean that they are wanting to die or getting ready to die, because we have to understand that there's a symbolic death that happens anytime that we are going through loss. A part of us dies, a part of who we were dies, the way that we used to be, our usual routines. There's a lot that dies with a loss. And so we have to, keep this in mind, and that if it sounds like it's, what is the word? Pessimistic or like sounds like a little bit like depression and things like that, it's part of the process, because we have to go through this process of letting something go, whether we are in a process of grief or coming close to our death. So signs of near death: saying goodbye, expressing a sense of completion, expressing enthusiasm and preparedness for the next phase, telling stories, even when these are not in the context of, even for someone who is dying, even if these things are not in the context of, oh yes, I'm getting ready to die, there is a theme that sometimes comes through about feeling complete, or, feeling like, it's time to give things away, talking about going home, or there's all these different things that happen. And they happen, some of them with complete awareness that they are dying, and some of them just happen quite spontaneously. And they don't know exactly if they're dying, but these signs begin to happen. And one of, there's also the sign, well, I think I come to that a little bit later, sorry. Okay, so there's also this preparing to leave theme that happens when people are in the in-between of dying. still, in between, before death. So there sometimes are these random moments when the dying person will start to ask about how to get somewhere, or where's the suitcase, or talk about trips, or other spaces that are right around there that they need to get to. And there's this urge to like get out of bed. All of these things are signs that we see when we're accompanying the dying, usually in circumstances of little to no medical intervention. So these things happen also when people are dying in hospitals and with with medical intervention, but they're sometimes harder to have a chance to come up, and they're sometimes harder to, to discern or to be noticed. This is a big one, in the presence of others. So we don't see anyone there, but our dying loved ones or patients have all manner of visitors. And they talk to them, and the visitors talk back to them and tell them information. And I don't know if this has happened to you, but in accompanying the dying have told me things that I didn't yet know, and that then somebody from outside world comes to tell me, and he already knew or she already knew because it was told to them from this unseen visitors. There's also movement that you may observe that happens, especially when patients are not so verbal, but even when they are, there are these episodes of having interactions with invisible things. Also, especially when we're talking about dying patients or dying loved ones, there's a moment when they start to know when death will come. There's a time of impatience and when is it coming? Is it really coming? But then there's a moment when something shifts and they know. Not only that, but sometimes these unseen people, visitors that are there with them, tell them exactly when. And I have actually witnessed conversations with the unseen, where a dying person is talking to somebody I cannot see, and they are negotiating when exactly they're going to go, and who they're going to wait for, who they're not going to wait for, what day, how many days, around what time. And I'm always I'm never going to take it literally, because you can never know, but in all of the cases that this has happened, it has actually happened exactly as it was predicted by these conversations with the unseen. And so to me, there's something to be said about that. Like when I'm with a family member and they're like, is that true? Does that mean they're dying on Wednesday? I say, I don't know, but we'll see. And in fact, they end up dying on Wednesday. So this is something that I wish we all would talk more about together, because we would find that many of us have witnessed this or have had the experience firsthand. And then I'm sure you've observed that some of our dying loved ones choose the perfect time to die. And there's the ones who wait and the ones who don't wait, the ones who wait for the specific person and the ones who want to be alone. And so talking about these kinds of things also is really meaningful for us who stay behind, because many of us have tortured ourselves for years because we weren't there, or because we were just going home to take that nap when our loved one died. And what we have to understand is that there seems to be a right time to die, and we need to honor and respect that and not take it personally. Oh, and so I think I'm going to stop here. Let me just go forward for a moment, because I would love to have more of a conversation with you. Oops, there. So I just want to say something about us as the compassionate companion. So each one of us has a compassionate capacity and impulse in our hearts. And this is human nature. And so we have been maybe separate from it, but it is only a matter of staying with it and connecting with it and wishing to have it be more manifest. And we all have it. This doesn't require training or, deep experience. It just requires the willingness to open our hearts and be present with others in these moments. And so any one of us can be a compassionate companion. And when I work, I live and work in Mexico, and there's no such thing as a death doula community. I'm trying to build one, and that's part of we do with the foundation here in Central Mexico. But so I was working alone, and I was often being called in not because I was a death doula, but because I was a psychologist who could, help patients come out of denial or come out of depression, because that's what was making them think that they were done with their lives. So I would come in and find patients just about to enter into active dying phase, and medical staff insisting that they were depressed or in denial about the fact that they could keep living. So when I was working alone, anyone who was there became part of my team. And so I have done beautiful accompaniment work with the cook and the gardener and the niece or the granddaughter or whatever, in whatever circumstances, with the neighbors of dying patients. And so anyone can be, as long as we can tap into that compassionate heart, and that in which we are all the same, which is that we are all human beings who suffer loss, who go through grief, and who are going to die. And just to say that our role is to be a witness and guide, and we can hold the integration for the patient or the grieving person. So that's all we are doing. As a witness, we're holding that space for them as they get to that place of resolution, whatever it is that they need to go through. And we help to elucidate and shed light into that work that they are doing by reflecting that back to them and showing appreciation for it. And then we can also rally others to support in this work. And with that, I will stop my share and come back to the room.
Wilka, thank you so very much. What I want to do here is spotlight you, spotlight me. Wilka, just so very much thank you. There's a bunch of questions that we're going to get to. I just wanted to share with you that there were so many times during your talk. One of the things that I learned from a friend of mine who was dying of AIDS, and we had done a lot of time planning for his death and how it was going to be and what we were going to do and all of this stuff. We'd gone to workshops, and then he got dementia, and none of us had planned for that, including him. So one night during his close to the end of his life, he was in a hospital. This was near the beginning of the epidemic. They didn't know what to do with him. And they had come in earlier in the day and told him he was going to be moved to a residential hospice, which he half-tracked some of it, but didn't really get most of it. So I was spending the night with him, and his new way of being in the world, which was completely different than his old way with the dementia, was to be angry and frustrated and paranoid, and people were out to get him. And so finally, after hours, he settled down to go to sleep, and I got into the bed they'd brought in for me and got settled myself. And about 30 seconds later, he woke up and said, I have to go tomorrow. We have to get ready. It's time to go. And he was a man of a schedule when he was in his better days. So I said to him in very reassuring voice, oh, honey, don't worry about it because tomorrow's not Saturday. And he laid back in the bed, and I thought he was just going to go crazy with this. And then he just like very clearly explained to me, Susan, there's a lot of things that people stand outside of, and reality is one of them. And he explained the time-space continuum for something that was very convenient for people like me, who was in my 3D body and reading the newspaper every day. But for him, what I've come to call it is he was on the mezzanine. So he was kind of in the elevator going back and forth between the ground floor, where we're all walking around in our solid bodies and doing our work, and back and forth between like wherever, whatever happens next. But he reported from this place that time and space continuum is like it's just kind of a convenience for us, that for him, even though I thought tomorrow was Wednesday, that it was Saturday for him, and that time and space kind of has this very amorphic kind of way of being in the world. And then he said to me, and I want to tell you that I know when you come in here, Susan, it's important to you that you're Susan. And when Bernice, his other best friend, when she comes in, it's important that she's Bernice. But what's important to me is that you love me, and the rest of these people here, he kind of waved to the hospital door. They don't have the time of day and they don't know what to do with me. And what I took that as saying is like my ego coming through the door and all of my Susanness was great for me, but not didn't help him at all. What mattered was that love came through the door, or this disconnection and just sort of dutiful, like taking care of his body came through the door. And that he was so incredibly aware of that, that's something I've used in every volunteer training that I've done. Um, because this information he's given me about time and space is be very helpful to me many other times. So I just wanted to share that, and also just so many points in your talk were just so I could relate to so many of them. And so there's a lot of questions actually. One is just a practical question. I just want to get this out of the way because I haven't asked you in advance. People are asking, will you be sharing the PowerPoint? And if you're not sharing the PowerPoint, understandably, could you share the outline for the PowerPoint so people could make notes and go through that? And I send a follow-up email to everybody within a set of evaluations that I'm going to send this afternoon. And so if that's possible, you could send that to me and I can send that out with this email this afternoon. And then some of the other questions we have, and feel free, I saw some hands raised, feel free to raise your hands. We're going to try to clear these questions here. So there were a number of questions about the idea of transportation, people talking about needing to go somewhere. And there's two questions that are similar, one from one of our wonderful hospice social workers and another from a wonderful community member whose husband has dementia. And he's confused, but he keeps talking about being in an airport, being in a train station, going somewhere. And so both of those folks have asked about this imagery of transportation, moving, packing, gathering belongings. And then what have you talked about seeing other people that have already died. And you've suggested some ways, some strategies for people to talk about that. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that through the lens of people with dementia. And I find it fascinating because I've also found this, that they have the same kinds of conversations around going places, getting ready, wanting to be prepared, going on a journey. And with people with dementia, sometimes like this, the people in the hospital said this to me about my friend when he had that conversation. Oh, well, he's got dementia, as if like anything he said was just doesn't matter, don't pay attention, which I found completely wrong. So maybe you could share something about this. And if Kate or Michaela want to say anything, just please raise your hand by going to the participant key or the reactions key and hit raise hand. And you go ahead, Wilka, and then I'll go down to the other questions.
Yes, thank you. First, I want to say I would love to have the chat transcript of this because I would love to read comments and questions. Also, I want to invite each of you, if you have a question that doesn't get addressed, please email me. I love to have these conversations and I don't mind taking the time to respond. Like, I'm available for that, and it's my work, but it's my love and my passion, right? And for anyone who wants to talk more about this, I will always open the door, the email address, whatever it is, so that we can have more conversations about this, and so that we can connect through it because it's so healthy and we don't have enough of it. So I invite you all to reach out to me if we don't get to it all today. And so what I'm going to share with you actually in addressing working with dementia, but I'm going to preface that by saying that often all of this kind of phenomena that happens a lot in hospitals and at homes with dying patients, and that it happens when people are going through intense grief and when people go into what is classified within the symptomatic classification of depression, is always, we're looking at it in this clinical detached way and dismissing it. And I think that's the problem that we are trying to address, that I'm trying to address, because there is a purpose for the symptoms of depression, and there is a purpose for the symptoms of having a complicated grief. And there is a purpose to these things that serves in a way that maybe we can't fully understand, but that we need to honor, no matter what. It's not a hallucination, and it's not a delirium, and it's not these things that they make them sound like, let's put them in that corner along with everything else that is undesirable. And I find working with dementia patients especially fascinating because it's like they're in that reality you're talking about from your friend Susan, that they're somewhere else in a different time and space, and that it seems like time is on top of each other, and it's like a different relationship to time. It's not linear, it's like a circle, or it's like a spiral or something else. So they're able to tap into a lot of things all at once that we are not. So for us it doesn't make any sense, but that doesn't mean it's less valid. So I work with one client patient who is somewhere in between with the dementia, and her experience is fascinating. So one of the things that I've observed is that in her case, she seems to no longer relate to her life from the space of regret and guilt and shame, but in the symbolic way, right? So there were certain moments in her life when she, before, when I worked with her and she didn't have dementia, it was clear what the regrets were and what we were working on. And then all of a sudden we couldn't work on that anymore because she was somewhere else, right? But what happened was she started to feel like where she was her house, but it wasn't her real house. And that in fact, there were 3 different houses that were identical houses, but only one was the real house. And it wasn't that one. And so I would just engage with her to tell me more about it, what made her realize that this wasn't the real one, and how would she know which one was the real one? And in that process, we do the same work that we would do if we're talking about what is the regret? What would you have wished to be different? And how can we come to terms with what is? So after she would explain to me what the real one would be, I understood that I'm working with what she wished would have happened. The real house is not the real life that she's having because she would have preferred a different outcome, right? So then we would talk about, okay, but we're in this one, right? So what are we going to do about the fact that this is the house that we're in, even if this one's not the real one? And how can we build a relationship with this one? And so then we would do that work. And so I'm just sharing that experience. It's a little different, but it's about how do we engage it from that symbolic standpoint, never talking about, oh, you have this regret because of this thing that happened, or what you're talking about is not true, there are no 3 houses, none of that. But to actually, we're not condoning or negating, we're in that space with them. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Wilka. And I encourage people to raise their hands using the participant key or the reactions key. And I also want to ask, would you consider, so somebody's asking, they work at a center for people with Alzheimer's disease. Many clients see deceased loved ones in the room looking up towards the ceiling, telling them to come down from there, that it's time for them to eat. And the question is, could dementia be considered one of these in-between or liminal states? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm no expert on the subject, but from my perspective and from my approach, absolutely. Yeah, and as I just described, it's a beautiful space in which we can also do work and accompany in a compassionate way.
Wilka, do you know of anybody that's written about the liminal state that may have had a near-death experience or has sort of come back from a close-to-death experience where they might have been in that space and come back and written about that, or any recommended accounts of that, or anything if somebody's interested in that, that they could read more about that?
How about I send you a reading list?
If you could do that right after this, that would be great, because we send out an evaluation, which we ask everybody to please, that should take 10 seconds or a minute. It's a virtual one where you can just check things, and then we send a resource sheet. So it would be great to get some resources around this. Thank you so much. And we'll gratefully send that out. Somebody else is asking about heavy duty drugs are often employed at end of life, at near death. Morphine can cause hallucinations for some people. Are these normal experiences of dying suppressed by drugs or perhaps heightened? And I would just like to share, this question came up. I was in a contemplative year-long training with Frank Gotsetsky, and Ram Dass was one of the co-teachers, and he would Zoom in from, and way before Zoom was a thing that we all did every day of our lives. And somebody asked him this question, Ram Dass, you've spent your whole life thinking, about consciousness, and you've had a number of strokes, you're using medication. And what he said, or what I understand Ram Dass said, is that medications like these at end of life can sometimes confuse your consciousness, but it never bothers your awareness, which I found really fascinating. So that place that we're watching everything from, for some people that are Buddhist oriented, or that there's a place, there's sort of the stuff that goes on in our mind, and there's sort of the observer. So the stuff going on in the mind and what's controlling that experience can be affected by some of these medications, but the awareness or the observer, or what some people may say is our essence, is unaffected by that experience. So I just want to know if you have any experiences about that.
Yeah, well, as I said, most of my experience, well, actually, I would have to say pretty much all of them have been low intervention to no intervention. So all of the experience I have had and witnessed are with patients who are not taking anything, and or it's a minimal dose of morphine or patches, the at the foundation of, or the minimal required just for the person to be comfortable. So I have not worked with, well, I've worked with people who have Alzheimer's or dementia in their dying phase, but not heavy dose of drugs that would actually, that I could say I saw affected things. But what it makes me think of is that when we're working with dreams, we notice a different sort of tone or personality sort of to the dream when somebody is under certain medications. But the message is not altered, right? So there's, you can even just not discern. I keep not knowing what the word is. It's not discern, but differentiate, or not. That's not it either. But there's the dream content, and then there's the influence. And of course, if you work with it more, you can observe it more and notice what is the influence and what is the dream content. And I would assume, I don't know, that it could be the same. And even when we are hallucinating, I mean, I can't speak for myself specifically, but it's coming from our own experience. So there's still something in there that is of us. And then there's this additional thing that you mentioned, Susan, which is that there is an essence of us that is not touched by any of it. And when I work with dying patients, we actually do exercises to move away from the pain and to move away from the identification with the body. And it works. And they are aware, and when they come back, they realize, oh, I am not my body. And so with that probably comes that differentiation that you're talking about, that consciousness or that essence is unaffected by whatever is going on, even if the body is sedated or in, having big dosages of medication.
Thank you so much. Maybe we'll have you come back and do a talk about that particular process, because I'm engaged. I have a dear friend who's quite ill right now, and she's very concerned about using high doses of medication. So has lots and lots of pain, and trying to work with that without her just living in this lots of suffering, which is not what anybody wants to do. So thank you for mentioning that. That's very timely for me too. So our next question here is, so this is Michaela. Michaela, is this still, if this is a question, you'd like to unmute yourself, Michaela, and just say anything. Michaela had asked earlier about this idea of traveling, a continuation of the earlier question. How would I help my husband who has dementia and is speaking often about airports, train stations, plans, when he is so confused all the time, and this seems to worry him quite a bit, these sort of ideas that he's got somewhere to go, or he's not making the train, or that sort of idea?
Well, I think it would probably be something that, Michaela, maybe we can have a conversation outside of this too, because I would need more information about, what exactly is he saying, and when does it happen, what, how far can we take that, can there be a dialogue about it, or is, so I think it's a little too specific for addressing it here, but I'm happy to have that conversation
Okay.
outside of here. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. And because people, I'll get your email and we'll make sure to send that to people. And somebody wanted to just share that when his wife was dying at the end of her life, she used to dream of her close relatives who are no longer living, that they were surrounding her and that came before her and just kind of made themselves known. Somebody asks again about the PowerPoint and let's see what else. A question or recommendation. First, I'm beyond grateful for this life-changing offering. I'm here from a pastoral aspect of human care and service as a community minister who has accompanied many on their end-of-life path. I'd be very grateful for opinions, suggestions, or recommendations for my own more focused training certification in this area. Would it be becoming a death doula, a chaplain, or psychologist, or what would you recommend if somebody's interested in this particular way of supporting people? And you are muted there, Wilka.
Yes.
Okay.
Who asked the question? I think I need to either read it or you have it read it to me again.
Yes. It's from Cicely. Question or recommendation. First, I'm beyond grateful for this life-changing offering. I'm here from a pastoral aspect of human care and service as a community minister who's accompanied many on their end-of-life journey. I would be grateful for opinions or suggestions or for recommendations for her own more focused training or certification in this area. Would it be as a death doula, chaplain, etc.?
Okay. I'm not here to promote myself, okay? I really am not. But I offer a course on companion or compassionate accompaniment, which I think is specifically about this. Because I've taken several doula trainings, and and I've taken way too many trainings of all kinds. And what I offer here in this presentation, what I offer to you as my life's passion, is what's missing. I find that to do this work, you might have, well, as a minister or some kind of spiritual guide or spiritual director, you have the access to work with and connect with any person. And that's really all you need. The death doula training, depending on which one, I know of several, have different approaches. That some of them are more practical and some of them are more heart-centered. Some of them are more hospice focused and some of them are more, so it really, I think, will depend on what do you need the certification or the, kind of training for versus what are you feeling called to do, right? So if you're feeling called to accompany the dying or the grieving from the standpoint of a spiritual direction, then you can approach it from that place and just follow your heart and do, and if you want to be able to, as a doula, enter a specific context, then that would be the way to go. If you go into chaplaincy, then are you talking about working at hospitals? So I think there's a lot to think about in terms of what choices to make.
Yes. Wonderful. So we have about 400 questions.
I'm happy to talk about that more if you like to.
Yes. So I'm going to just go to the next couple. This is a gentleman who's sharing again about his wife and dying, and she had a dream that she was going to be carried away by her departed parents, wondering if that was symbolic language or just paying attention to that also. Another woman asking about an elderly uncle in the ICU, very confused. He's thinking he's been kidnapped and that he should be calling the police. Could this be sort of the liminal space experience and his confusion that you're talking about? What would be the best way to possibly help him or people that
I love these questions. So when dying patients or grieving patients have dreams, they're symbolic in the sense that they're coming through in these ways, these intangible ways. But often they're a clear indication of preparation for transition, especially when the dying are dreaming or seeing loved ones who have already died. This is usually a key, and you can ask nurses who won't tell anyone, but who have observed this in their shifts, that they start to know, oh, this one's getting ready to go. So there's that part. And then in terms of when what is showing up are scary things. You know, whether it's somebody is getting taken, forced to go, kidnapping, like taken away from where they are. That that could be several things. I've seen it as a fear that is being personalized in order to work with it, so it is symbolic, or as a resistance that needs to be worked through because the relationship to leaving is that I don't want to go, I'm being taken by force. And so with these kinds of experiences, again, we ask more, tell me more. And what are they saying? What do they look like? What do they want? Where are they taking you? You know, to get more information about what is happening in that symbolic space so that then we can have a better sense of how we can hold them, guide them through their process.
Thank you. I just want to say to anybody that has to go, I want to respect your time, and just to know that we will be sending out a follow-up email as soon as I get these resources from Wilka that will contain her email. It will contain a list of books that she has that she'd recommend for reading if you're interested in this kind of space and exploring this more. And if Wilka has a couple of more minutes, we'll also stay on and continue to answer the questions that are here. And I just appreciate so much all of you taking your time from busy days. I know there's people here from Europe. This is the middle of the night. In India, I think it's 2 in the morning. For our friend that's here from India. So I just want to just express our deep gratitude for Mission Hospice that you've taken the time to join us. And please know that we're available as a resource for those living in our communities, please, which is San Mateo County and northern Santa Clara County. Please know that if there's any way that we can support you, you'll have my email from the many emails I send you about these events. And we would do whatever we could to support you as you're nearing end of life or a loved one is getting close to that point. So we're going to continue with the questions, Wilka, and I'd say we'll try to do another 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes. Okay. Thank you so much. And we'll read through everybody's praise of you also. People were asking about putting up the last slide, but we're going to send your email out to them. And somebody sharing of hospice volunteer that most of what she's been trained to do is just accompany people as you're expressing, to ask questions. And occasionally she'll let them know that it would be okay to let go if they were interested in that. Another question about dementia appears to be continuously in this in-between waking and dreamlike state and ways to work with that. And I think you've talked about that in one of the earlier questions. Just to be in that space with them. One of my sweetest memories is coming alongside a person who was convinced that he had missed his school bus, was so concerned that his mother, this is an older person, that his mother would find out. So to have conversations about those. This is from Lucinda White. Wilka, you shine. Thank you for this incredibly deep conversation. I'm touched and moved. Do you remember me from HOTWH? I randomly just saw this talk when I was researching local hospice organizations and saw the classes offered. That's wonderful, but she apparently knows you from some other training. So
yeah,
perhaps.
where is she? What's her name?
Lucinda White. I don't know what HOTWH is.
That's why I'm trying to look it up so I can see it. Sometimes, you know, I have an issue with language in the sense that when people spell things out in a different language, it doesn't register. So I'm like, what?
Linda, would you be able to unmute yourself and just let us know? Oh, you know what? I'm going to guess that you can't right now, but could you unmute yourself now and let us know where you and Wilka have met each other?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. My registration is off. It's Cindy White, and we do Dr. E.
Yeah, of course.
Healer.
Yes. Yes, I remember you. Hi.
Hi. Yeah, we meet up every summer with Clarissa Piccola Estes, and I just found you randomly on the internet, and this is so powerful. Thank you.
Oh, you're so welcome.
Thank you so much for joining us. And if you're local to us, stay in touch.
I am. That's how I found her. I was looking for local hospice organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Lots of people here thanking you. Thank you. There's somebody that's written to me in Spanish. Mabel, are you still here? Because you probably remember from our last time that my Spanish is terrible. And unless you're asking me for directions, I probably can't help with what you're asking. Mabel, are you still here? And if you are still here, Mabel, if you could unmute yourself, you're welcome to ask the question in Spanish, and Wilka can translate that so we know what the question is, if you'd like.
Mabel Chávez.
Sí.
Hola, ¿cómo están? Perdón, nos podía quitar el mute. ¿Cómo estás, Wilka? ¿Cómo están todos? Pues quiero preguntarte sobre la muerte. Estoy ahorita atendiendo, bueno, estoy con un niño de 2 años que el papá murió hace poco por la pandemia. Pues del momento que estoy con él, a los 2 años, no sé cómo trabajar la parte del tema de la familia. Nosotros como docentes tenemos que trabajar el tema de familia. Entonces, con esto de la muerte, los papás hablan poco o nada de la muerte del papá y hacen creer al niño que el tío, o sea, el hermano del papá de él, es su papá y los hijos de este tío son sus hermanos. Entonces, claro, debo respetar cómo ellos se organizan. Sin embargo, como yo, como profesora, cómo debo tratar esos temas, que es un niño que igual tenemos que tratar de manera natural, tuvo un papá, que tiene una mamá. ¿Cómo hacerlo? ¿Qué me sugieres tú? ¿Cómo se debe trabajar? Y obviamente como con niños, porque yo sé que ahora voy a tener algunos niñitos que voy a tener con esas faltas, ¿no? Te agradezco, Wilk.
¿Y está bien si lo hago en inglés para que la otra gente también lo entienda?
Sí, yo lo entiendo muy bien, sino que era más fácil decirte esto en
Sí,
español.
claro.
Gracias.
Okay. So she's asking about working with children, especially very young children who are navigating loss, with families who are being very unclear and evasive with the themes of death and loss and that, right, in general terms. And so, you know, I think that with anyone, whether it's a child or a dying person, working with the truth is really essential. So to withhold information from any person only just like gets things stuck and gets things to be very confused. And for a child who intuitively knows more than they can know with their conscious mind, to negate what he knows inherently creates greater confusion for them in the present and in the future, because then they are conditioned to deny their instinct and their intuition. And so the first thing to do with a child who has suffered loss around them is to speak in their terms. And how do you do that? You first ask the child, what do you think happened? And where do you think he went? And, you know, how does that make you feel? And what would you like to do? And then based on what the child responds from where they are, right? We're always meeting them where they are. Then you guide them to that. You know, so children will want to connect with them or to do something or to, I don't know, they are the most creative and they are the most with it, actually. We have a lot to learn from children. So to protect them, we're not really protecting them. So the first step is to not lie and not withhold, but to ask them. So they give us the language that we will use to talk with them. We're not imposing our language because they're not going to understand it, but they will feel our hearts and our presence and trust that, and then they will tell us, and then based on what language they use, you can respond and guide. I hope that's helpful. And you can always reach out to me and we can talk about this more another time, for sure. I'm serious, people. I am.
Thank you so very much. And thank you, Mabel, for asking. I want to just say something because, of course, I didn't understand a whole bunch of the question, but this idea of children, last month we had a presenter, and it's up on our YouTube channel, David Feldman, speaking about hope at end of life and how people adjust their understanding or their desires or their hope if they have the accurate information about what their prognosis is, and the role of people that are hospice volunteers or doulas accompanying people in that experience is trying to really help them adjust what they hope for to be more realistic and something that they can manage in this present state that they're in. But when talking about the children reminded me so much, my first experience with death was my mother's mother. and the information arrived over the telephone, and my mother just started screaming in the kitchen, which is not my mother's normal temperament. She sort of collapsed on the counter. She was sobbing. She had one of my younger siblings under her arm, just weeping. And my husband, my father her husband ran down and threw the phone and like yelled at the person calling. It was a very traumatic experience for my brother and I who were witnessing this because we were hiding under the kitchen table. We were so afraid. And when my father saw us, he just looked down at us. He yelled at us. He said, "Go back and finish your breakfast and get on the school bus. You're going to be late for school." And we started to ask a question. He said, "Everything is fine here. Everything is fine." And I remembered recently, so I'm 63, and it took me, that happened when I was 7.5, all of these years, over 55 years, to realize like that was the first time that I was told that what I knew to be true, I knew everything wasn't okay. I knew something terrible had happened, but I was being told by a parent, and they had the best intention, I'm sure, that everything is fine and that I can't trust my own understanding of what's happening. So this conversation with children, I think it's so beautiful to really engage the child with what is, why are you asking that? Well, I've just seen my whole family collapse on the counter sobbing, this seems, and people will try to either prevent that person from losing hope or from hearing something that's too intense for them to hear, which I often hear families say about their children. And I want to respond and say, have you met your children? If you want to know what's going on in your family, ask your children, because there's nothing that they've missed. They know everything that's happening in they may not speak it because they know they're not allowed to, but they've observed everything that's happening, and then they've just kind of tried to internalize it and make up their own story. So my story was stay as far away from death, as far away and as long as possible, and that lasted about 27 years. So thank you. And I believe, really that children, to find out where they're at, what they're hearing, what they're understanding, and then to help them really understand death in a way that isn't about, we're just going to pretend this isn't happening right now.
Yeah, I just want to add that whether it's a child or a dying patient, because I've encountered this a lot too, that the family members don't want to tell them what the doctor said, and that there's nothing to be done. And what that does when we withhold information, regardless of age and even regardless of circumstance, is that it generates an atmosphere of suspicion. It generates an atmosphere of something is not right, and therefore I am not safe. So I cannot trust. And so it just builds a wall between the person who is denying something or withholding something and the person who all that they need is communication and connection and to feel like they're not alone. So yet more reason to not withhold. And it's just about finding how to express it. And you do it by asking the person, and then they guide you into how you're going to have that conversation.
Thank you so much, Wilka. There was a question here, one of our wonderful hospice volunteers. Have you ever seen a person's soul leave their body?
I have. That's a great question. Okay, so I've
question.
decided since last year that I am coming out fully with my truth, and that I don't expect anyone to believe it, and I'm not here to convince anyone of it. I have felt, and I'm sure that many of you who have been in the room with dying people, you have felt it. I have not seen it, but I have seen them afterwards. Mm-hmm. So I don't see them right in that process, but I see them after. And not all of them, but some of them. And some of them have different ways in which they show up, right? Some of them show up in their forms. Some of them show up in a sort of a sensation of a presence. Some of them show up with words. But in my reality, it is not uncommon.
Yes.
And it's actually an amazing sensation. If we are really connected with it when it's happening, it really is a beautiful sensation of lifting and liberation. So I would only assume that it's that feeling of what it's like, as Ramdas said, it's like taking off a really tight shoe.
Yes.
That sensation like permeates the entire space where we are. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I've had that experience multiple times. And in terms of seeing the spirit leave the body, like you, I've seen the moment before the last breath, I've seen the last breath, and I've seen the moment after the last breath. And those three places are very, very different. And I often will say, I think being with somebody at the moment that they die, it's shocking, even if it's expected and you've been sitting there. But there's just something that happens. It shifts. There's such a dramatic shift in the being alive, even liminally or minimally, still in the body and being out of the body. And I've had experiences which I haven't shared often. My friend Andrea and I were talking about doing a workshop just called "All the Weird Experiences Nobody Talks About," and it's just inviting people who have been with people who have died, so that they can say all the weird experiences that they've had, because often people are just like, oh, she's just bereft. She doesn't really understand what's happening. I had a friend who was the closest person in my life die, and we had spent 3 years preparing for his death. When he died, I had my hand on his heart, and I felt an electric shock that I can only think of that happens like when people are talking about like Buddhist lamas having transmissions. But there was so much energy that came into my body, and it felt like it slammed into my heart in a way that almost knocked me back off of the chair. And there was somebody sitting literally across his body, and I was just like this. And I looked at that person and I started to say, do you have, and he's like, I just need to get out of here and have a cigarette. And I was just like, everything I thought about where we're living and how we operate just all shifted in that moment. Go have a cigarette and enjoy that. And months, like for weeks, like my friend was with me all the time. Other people would come into a room and go, gosh, it's just like Bob's just right here. And I'd be like looking at him in the corner. And finally I had to say to this friend, like, look, I know you've been dead for about 49 days here, but you need to actually be dead and gone, because it's so hard for me to deal with this grief when you're like, I look over and you're sitting in the corner, like, and would be weird. I'd go out to dinner and feel like he was sitting across the table from me. And I was grieving also. Please do not miss that point. I was grieving. I was getting support for that. But this sensation of him being very physically present and other people feeling him when I would walk around in my life was just something that it took me a long time to say, okay, I'm going to talk about this. Because I think, what if somebody else is having this experience and thinks they've lost their mind? Or just in the wrong line of work. So,
Yeah,
another
so
question,
I
Wilka.
agree that you should have this seminar. I'll help you with it if you want.
Beautiful. Okay. All the things that nobody wants to say, or all the things that people think that are too crazy to say. Somebody else is asking, is it possible that as a friend of someone who is having stage 4 cancer, the friend has one of those traveling dreams?
Okay, sorry, you're gonna have to repeat that. But before that, I just want to address something very quickly. That electric sensation in the heart that you felt, I've heard that. I've not experienced it myself,
Up my arm.
but I have heard several people say that, and in some cases they have likened it to that exact thing that you just said. That it's that what they talk about, that the lamas feel like something has been passed down to them. So yeah. So there you go. Not uncommon either. Please repeat the question again, because I was still thinking about that.
Yes, thank you so much. And that's very helpful, because my whole life changed with that. I mean, I do end of life, training and care and stuff now. But the question is it possible that as a friend of a stage 4 cancer person, that one has those traveling dreams?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yep. We begin to dream for each other if we're in close connection with another person, or if we are in that realm together. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Somebody was asking, there's an email address being provided. Thank you much. Wonderful. There's thank you. Beautiful. Somebody here is saying, my 55-year-old cousin has cancer. He's near death, has much anger about the diagnosis and prognosis. He's very unresolved. He's now in so much pain that he's medicated highly and rarely lucid. Very restless, trying to get out of the bed, pulling the covers and the clothing off frequently. Do you have any suggestions for anything that we could do to provide comfort in a spiritual or emotional level at this time before he dies?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because unfortunately, when that happens and then people are very sedated, then whatever opportunity we could have to work through that anger is very minimal, if there's any at all. But to be able to sit with, either in presence or not, with the essence of that person, and to have an imaginal dialogue, or to offer the prompts and imagine as they arrive with that person, and not how it might go. We don't need to know their process, but just that somebody is offering the guidance, it does help. And I'll tell you a story I had. I was called in to visit a patient who was in the ICU and who was declared brain dead. And the family was really, you know, they wanted to, I mean, they didn't know what I could do, but they asked me to go. And here, to go into the general hospital can be quite the challenge. There's so much, I don't even know if it's really true bureaucracy, but it's ridiculous. How many people need to approve of it? How many signatures you need to get in there, because it's the ICU. And sometimes I wonder if it's just that they don't want you to go in there when they're not ready to give you a show that appears like they're really taking care of everyone properly. So it could be that. So I spent several hours in the waiting room, and I just decided to sit there and go into a contemplative state and I just sat there, closed my eyes, and I was with the patient whom I knew for several hours, and just, you know, with my heart with the greatest devotion that I could muster, because I really wanted to be close to him. I just reached out to him and went through and anything that came from my heart, I shared. Obviously, it's not something that you literally think with words. It's something else that happens. And I sat in that space connecting with him for about 2 hours. And then they never were able to get me in there. And they said, no, come tomorrow and the social worker will be here. And then once the social worker is here, we'll get the right signatures and and then you can go. And I went home. It was the evening. And in the night, I woke up and felt that he was saying, thank you, I'm ready. And I'm getting goosebumps right now. So, and I got a message like, I don't know, maybe an hour later, I got a call that he had died that night. And so I would like to believe, or it's my choice to understand that as we did the work, and, you know, he was brain dead. So, and I was not with him physically. So I think this is very possible. I mean, yeah.
I'm thinking right now about a hospice volunteer that spent the better part of her work. She was giving a massage to a woman who was living in a beautiful place, very well cared for by her family, end-stage dementia. She was on service for more than a year. And the volunteer called me at one point and just said, listen, I don't mind going, but I just don't think this is doing anything for her. And I realized, oh, this volunteer is a very logical, she's trained as a sort of engineer and computer. And I thought, oh, okay. I said, Laura, you know, the next time you go out to see this person, and I said, you can do this in whatever way makes sense to you. But before going in, or when you get in her room, drop from your head into your heart and just try to stay there. You'll notice you're going to be thinking about, oh, I'm doing this, or I should be doing, just kind of stay in that heart the whole time you're giving her that massage. Mm-hmm. And see how you feel, because we don't know really. I don't know how we'd ever know how she's feeling. She hasn't spoken in a year. But see how you feel leaving the room, because being in that more open, receptive, intuitive space, connecting with her that way, I thought maybe that would be helpful. So she calls me from the parking lot of this patient's apartment building, and she said, you'll never believe what happened. I said, oh, I probably will. She said, I tried to. I kept going in and out. Like I kept seeing I was like, that part's not important. I said, you know what, she said, well, then I walked to the door as I always do. And I said to her, Mrs. So-and-so, I don't know what will happen, but I'll be here next week if you are. And she said, I heard this noise, and I turned around, and the woman opened her eyes and said, thank you. And then she just went back she didn't say that. I mean, Laura continued to see her, but she didn't say that again. But I feel like that connecting, there's lots of ways that we can connect with people and touch people and hear people. So I appreciate so many of these questions, because the intention in all of them is, how can I be the most loving presence and allow this person a death free as much as possible of suffering, and feeling connected and loved as they leave. And I feel like these are just such beautiful questions. Other things, lots of lots of hope that we're going to be doing the Things Too Crazy to Talk About seminar. Somebody suggested this remote healing sounds like Jesus. Remote healing that people do, I know from our Healing Touch program, Reiki, we can do that remotely. Healing Touch, we can do remotely. So yes. And somebody else is saying, I can definitely support the remote connecting and communication. Thank you so much for just saying this. That looks to be the end of the questions that we have, which is perfect because it's just about 3 o'clock. And I have to go to another training at 3 o'clock. So I just want to thank everybody for being here today. Wilka, this was just so beautiful. And thank you for spending almost a whole extra half hour with us.
It's my pleasure. I live for this. So I am grateful for the opportunity. I'm grateful for all your questions and comments. I hope that you will connect with me. Yeah, this is what brings me to life and keeps me alive. So I love to share and connect with others in this way.
Me too. I 100% support that idea and that thought, and it is really just so beautiful. So I'm going to say goodbye on behalf of everybody at Mission Hospice and Home Care. I just want to thank you all for being here. I want to let people that live in our local community of San Mateo County or northern Santa Clara County know that if this kind of conversation and supporting people in this way at end of life is of interest to you, that we can support that with you through our volunteer program if you're interested in becoming part of our community education program. And also for people just to know that you can call us at any time with questions about people that are end of life looking for services or support. And our number will be in the email that gets sent out. And of course, anybody could email me. We'll include Wilka's email, her website. She's going to send a resource list. If she's willing to share an outline of her slides, we'll send that also. And I'm going to be sending an evaluation, and particularly for this kind of programming, which is a little different than, Hospice 101 programming, please do fill out the evaluations because I'd like to offer more like this. And we'll send you the link to our YouTube channel as well, because we have about more than a dozen conversations from 2020 and the early part of 2021, including Ken Ross's talk, How It All Began, who is the now president of the Elisabeth Kubler Ross Foundation. So thank you all, and I am looking forward to seeing you again. Take good care.
Thank you so much, everyone. It's been wonderful. Thank you, Susan, so much.
Great.